Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're zeroing in on just one really insightful section from Dr. Darren Cannell's book, Coaching Sports to Internet Brats. We're not tackling the whole book this time. Our mission for this deep dive is really just to unpack what the author says about this specific dynamic he calls the parent's voice in youth sports.
And, it's a fascinating section because it doesn't pretend to have all the answers, which I think is interesting in itself.
Right.
It really delves into that, challenging space between parents, coaches, athletes. It's more about exploring the questions the author himself raises and the kind of philosophy he suggests.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's this core tension he sets up almost immediately.
Yeah.
This idea that a parent's voice, from the sidelines should always be positive, never negative.
Right.
But then that bumps right up against the reality of, parents paying often quite significant fees, which can lead to this feeling of maybe entitlement, like they should have a say. Okay, let's dig into this.
So let's start with the author's baseline, which is really clear. The parent's voice, it has to be positive, full stop.
Okay.
Cheering for good effort, absolutely. Applauding good plays, even for the other team sometimes, that's great. But booing, according to him, that's just never acceptable.
And he uses this incredible, almost shocking example to really hammer this point home, doesn't he?
He does.
He talks about coaching a game where the spectators were just so out of line, so disrespectful to the other team, the ref, even the opposing fans, that the referee actually stopped the game, cleared the stands, removed every single spectator from the gym.
Wow. Empty stands.
Empty stands. The game only started again once it was just the teams and the officials left.
That kind of, drastic action, it really highlights the author's point, doesn't it? That spectators need to mirror the behavior we expect from the players.
Absolutely.
And it shows the coach's responsibility sometimes to step in and, demand that basic level of respect if the parents aren't setting that example themselves.
He actually lists specific things parents do from the stands that he feels are just flat out inappropriate. We mentioned booing, but he also calls out coaching from the stands.
Oh, yeah, the sideline coaching. Big one.
Trying to direct your kid or even the whole team, basically interfering with what the actual coach is trying to do.
Exactly. That's a huge one. And another thing he flags is criticizing your kid's performance, right after the game ends, the second they walk off the court or field.
The car ride home critique.
Yeah, that. His reasoning is that these things, they undermine the coach. They confuse the athlete.
Right. Who do they listen to?
Exactly. And that immediate criticism, it prevents the kid from even processing the game themselves. It just feels like piling on. He even brings in his own mother's rule, the classic.
If you have nothing nice to say
nothing at all. Simple as that.
That old rule, it really does kind of capture the essence, doesn't it? The parent's job in that moment is just be calm, be respectful, model it, even when things get intense.
Yeah, your reaction sets the tone for your kid, for everyone.
Okay, but then this idea of always being positive, it gets a bit trickier when you factor in the money, right? Who's paying for all this? The author calls it a delicate issue. Parents are investing, sometimes a lot, in fees, equipment, travel. Does paying that money give them a right to, say, influence coaching decisions, like playing time or team strategy?
And this is where he's really quite honest, which I appreciate. He actually says, and I think this is a direct quote, "I do not know the answer to this question, and it is something I have thought a lot about." He contrasts it with, a pro team or a heavily sponsored team where the sponsor's paying for wins, so yeah, they get a say. He kind of wonders if parent fees accidentally create a similar dynamic, even if nobody means for it to.
So he doesn't have the answer, but he does have a belief about it now, after thinking it through.
He does, and his current belief is, pretty firm and maybe a little controversial for some. He thinks winning is important, sure, but the fees, he sees those as primarily paying for the practices, the training, the development.
So the games.
The games, in his view, are like a bonus. They're something the athlete has to earn the right to participate in. Through effort, through showing up in practice, through getting good enough.
So it's earned, not bought.
Exactly. That earning it is key idea is just, it's central to this whole section. He really stresses that being upfront about this with players and parents right from the start is vital.
So setting expectations.
Totally. He believes this approach, where game time isn't just handed out, it's earned through work. That's what builds not just successful athletes, but more importantly, successful adults. life skills.
Which means, conversely, a player who gets a lot of playing time without really earning it, or maybe only because a parent complained,
Yeah,
they're actually missing out on something important, according to him. That feeling of sitting the bench because you haven't quite earned your spot yet. He thinks that should be the motivation. That's what should drive the kid to put in the extra work.
precisely. He argues that if it's a sport where everyone just plays the same amount no matter what, well, you dilute that learning potential. The real value, he says, comes from the grind, the effort, the development you have to work for. It's earned value, not just participation value you paid for.
Okay, so let's say you're a parent. You're paying the fees, you're watching the games, and maybe you don't agree with the coach's choices. You feel that urge to, you know, shout instructions or complain afterwards.
Mhm.
What does the author suggest you do?
Well, his advice is pretty direct. He basically says if you find yourself constantly wanting to chime in or do things differently, maybe you should think about becoming the coach or at least the assistant coach.
Oh, okay. Put up or, well,
Yep.
support the coach.
That's kind of the challenge, right? If you think you know better, step up and take on the responsibility. And it connects to his other point about supporting the coach you've chosen or the one your kid's team has.
Because undermining them teaches.
Teaches selective respect. That's his term. Like, it's okay to ignore or disrespect authority if you don't agree with them. He even says that a coach you might personally think is poor can still teach valuable lessons. Maybe just lessons in how not to do things.
Interesting perspective. So there's learning even in a less than ideal situation.
Yeah, so ultimately, when you look at the parent's role through his eyes, it boils down to being the support system, the
Yeah.
cheerleader, making sure your kid is ready, socially, mentally, physically prepared,
But not being the coach.
but not being the coach, especially during the game or in those really sensitive moments right after.
Huh.
That's the line.
He shares that personal strategy too, right? The 2-minute rule.
Oh, yeah, I thought that was really practical. He limits his own feedback to his kid right after a game or practice to just 2 minutes.
Just 2 minutes.
Yeah. Now, if the kid wants to talk more, if they initiate it, fine, he'll engage. But it's a conscious effort to avoid that common trap.
The ranting and raving on the drive home.
Exactly, that whole scenario. And he identifies that dynamic where the sport becomes more about the parent's ego or their financial return than the child's actual experience. He calls that the biggest error parents make.
Mm-hmm.
You see it when parents obsess about getting their money's worth in playing time, or push relentlessly without actually listening to their kid, or just let the sport totally dominate the child's life.
And it comes back to how you measure success in all this. He ties parenting success directly to the traits the athlete develops, not
Yeah.
the scoreboard.
Right. Is the kid coachable? Are they respectful to everyone, teammates, opponents, refs?
A good teammate.
Yeah. Do they show resilience, mental toughness? Are they trying their best? That, he argues, is the direct reflection of solid parenting, not just wins and losses.
It's a powerful reframing, really shifts the focus.
It does. And he wraps up this whole section on parents with a quote that kind of sums up his entire philosophy here. It is not what you do for your children, but what you taught them to do for themselves that will make them successful human beings.
Wow. Okay, so we've really dug into this specific but really rich section of Dr. Cannell's book today, focusing on that parent's voice. We talked about his emphasis on positivity, the specific things he says parents shouldn't do.
Yeah, the booing, the sideline coaching, the immediate criticism.
Right, and we explored that really complex, delicate issue he raises about the fees parents pay versus his core belief that value, like playing time, needs to be earned.
And like we said at the start, he doesn't claim to have easy answers, especially on the fee issue. But his philosophy, his perspective, it definitely gives you a lot to think about, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Makes you examine your own role, maybe your own expectations, and what you genuinely hope your child gets out of playing sports. And maybe to leave you, our listener, with a final thought from this section, something that kind of goes beyond the sports field. How does this idea he presents that anything of value is not given and should not be easily obtained, bought, or given, how might that apply in other areas of life, where real lasting value comes from effort, from earning it, rather than just entitlement or circumstance, something to maybe mull over on your own?